Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. We'd hoped to be off the Twitter beat by now, since there is actual news happening in the world, but there was a development in the president's ongoing feud with a certain cable news outlet that we felt was revealing enough to bring you details of tonight. Remember that professional wrestling video the president tweeted out the other day, the one with the CNN logo superimposed on the face of the villain? How could you forget that? Well, we interrupt this broadcast for some breaking news, because CNN had its own crack investigative team working through the night to hunt down who made that seconds-long piece of tape, because nothing is more important than that. And in the end, of course, they found out. We'll let them explain what happened next.
The Reddit user behind it posted his apology after CNN identified and tried to contact him. He apologized for some of his other posts that were racist and anti-Semitic. Now, CNN is not publishing the user's name because of his apology, his removal of all the offensive posts, and his pledge not to repeat this behavior on social media.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. First, one of the biggest news organizations in the world spent a ton of money and a ton of time trying to find out who made this video. Now, you probably don't care who made it, because why would you care? Some guy on the internet, crushing him is not that important. But CNN felt it was vital. Why did they feel that way? Because in politics, all dissent merits a response, even if it was a joke. Whatever it takes to beat your opponent, in this case Trump, is worth doing. So this is Oppo research, posing as journalism. Then there's the question of this guy's name. CNN is keeping it secret. Why are they doing that? Well, as you just heard them explain, because the man in question has apologized and promised he'll never do it again. Wait a second. When did CNN become a law enforcement agency or a religious order? Since when is it CNN's job to police the internet for immorality, to spare punishment in return for repentance? Maybe they'll start selling indulgences next. But that was just the first explanation for why they're withholding the name. CNN later announced that it has, quote, decided not to publish the name of the Reddit user out of concern for his safety. But that turned out to be an even more problematic explanation, since the network had already announced that if the naughty internet guy in question ever got naughty on the internet again, for example, by, I don't know, criticizing CNN, then they'd release his name, which by their own description might imperil his life, which to a lot of people seemed pretty much like blackmail. Do as we say or we'll hurt you. Conventional news organizations don't typically make threats like that, ever. So it was another tough day for CNN today. One of their morning show anchors may have come up with the simplest answer of all. Let social media decide what to do about this guy's identity. Twitter, the perfect forum for thorny moral questions. Here's the quote. Should CNN reveal name of Reddit user who made Trump wrestling video? That's a tweet from Chris Cuomo. Quote, had a lot of bigoted and hateful material on page and website. Okay, so releasing this guy's name would endanger his safety, but then again, he's got, quote, bigoted and hateful material on his website, so maybe he deserves it. You decide, citizens of Twitter. Spare or kill him, your call. This is getting grotesque. We were all better off when CNN stuck to wars and hurricanes and missing airplanes. Mark Stein is a longtime news watcher, an author and a columnist, and he joins us tonight. Why? I'm wondering this. They put their crack investigators on the question of who made this dumb internet gif. Why not find out where al-Baghdadi is or something?
Yeah.
If you're that good at finding stuff.
Right, that's what your investigative unit should be doing. This guy is entirely tangential to it. The way things work on the internet is somebody sends somebody a picture, and that person emails it to somebody else, and that person tweets it to somebody else, and 37,000 links later, it's become a thing, and nobody cares who created it or what other content he has created. Even if you accept that Chris Cuomo's definition of hate speech and bigoted and racist and anti-Semitic material ought to be the standard applied across the internet. Basically, a major news organization is policing some no-name schlub's internet content and threatening to reveal his identity if he transgresses their particular standards. That's completely nuts. I mean, Wolf Blitzer has basically put a horse's head in this guy's bed, and I don't know how this happened. CNN was like the world's most boring cable network just a month ago. Now it's behaving more and more nuttily each day.
So that's too good. So, but I mean, they seem to have come up with this kind of remarkable standard. They said, look, we're not releasing the guy's name because it would be a threat to his safety, presumably his physical safety. Right. But we're going to release his name if he says something we don't like. Now, people are calling that blackmail. Right. I don't know if it's blackmail exactly, but it's pretty weird for a news organization to, in effect, threaten harm if someone doesn't do what they say.
Well, the name is either newsworthy or it's not. But he got the message, they contacted him, and he immediately takes down all his internet posts. Now, I'm not a great believer in anonymity on the internet. I get tired of being called out by some twerp who has, you know, some butch name and an avatar from Game of Thrones, but he thinks that I'm not being manly enough on the internet. I'm not a particular fan of internet anonymity, but this guy got the message. He understands that CNN is watching him, so that if he were to make another anti-CNN GIF, another anti-CNN tweet, then they would release the fact that he's got a $500 lien on his home for unpaid property taxes, or his car was seen last Tuesday night parked outside Madame Fifi's bondage parlor. This is a ridiculous way for a news organization to behave, but the threat of people like Chris, and the idea, by the way, of Chris Cuomo and other CNN anchors saying, oh, we're so relieved. At last, you know, there were physical threats to our safety, and at last we're all relieved because now we've got the goods on this guy and we can sleep at night and journalists are free to walk the streets once more. Get lost, you creeps. The 5th anniversary of the Danish cartoons, I appeared on stage with 5 other people. Of those 5 other people I was on stage with in Copenhagen for the 5th anniversary of the Danish Mohammed cartoons. One was shot at point-blank range. The other had his event shot up, and 2 people were killed. Another was forced out of public life entirely. And the 4th had her family's restaurant firebombed. Those are real threats against media figures that go on in Europe right now. The idea that reworking a joke that everyone knows is a joke is a threat to Chris Cuomo's safety is the most narcissistic, solipsistic act of navel-gazing by a profession that is already so self-obsessed, nobody who isn't in the media can stand the media.
That's so nicely put. And the sense of humor is always the first thing to go. That's always the sign you've completely lost perspective. CNN has Ministry of Truth. Mark Stein, God bless you for coming on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Well, meanwhile, in the realm of real news, the 4th of July holiday saw ominous actions from the country of North Korea. On Tuesday, the DPRK launched its first ever ICBM, a 2-stage rocket that could travel more than 3,000 miles, the U.S. military estimates. That's far enough to hit Alaska. Now, today, the UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, warned that military action is on the table as a response to aggression from North Korea. What happens next? Michael Malice is an expert on that country and a biographer of Kim Jong-il. George Friedman is the founder of Geopolitical Futures, and they both join us now. So first to you, Michael, what is the point, as an expert on North Korea, what is the point of this exercise? The Kim regime obviously thinks this through. It has some strategic purpose. What would that be?
See, when you're trying to analyze North Korea, it's trying to like read a book upside down in a mirror and underwater. You have to try to deduce backwards. And what I realized just today is this. North Korea has always asserted their right under their sovereignty, just like the U.S., to engage in shipment and sales of weapons. What we are seeing, in my opinion, incidentally or by accident, is North Korea having commercials for their product. They're showing that their missiles work. And they're also showing their missiles allow them, a country the size of Pennsylvania, to stand up against China, Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. and basically be invincible. So this is a great sales pitch for them to show that they have weapons that they can sell and make a lot of money of. And I haven't heard anyone realize that that's the case.
That's fascinating. It's a dangerous sales technique. George Friedman, you game things out for a living, I think, pretty accurately. We're going to press China to help mitigate this threat. If they don't respond and we're forced to use military action of some kind, what happens next?
Well, first, the Chinese have no reason to solve this. They don't want the North Koreans to have weapons, but they would love the United States to have the military need. because in that case, the United States may fail. It will be portrayed as an aggressor and so on. So I don't think there's any chance of China really solving this. The next step is to continue to press so that the United States makes it very clear that they've tried everything possible. At the point where that fails, Secretary of Defense Mattis has made it very clear. The United States will not allow North Korea to get an ICBM that can reach the United States, and is not going to wait for military action until they do get that ability.
So what does that, I mean, if I could just quick follow-up, so what does that mean? What form would military action take, do you think, most likely against North Korea?
Well, the obvious goal is to take out the nuclear facilities. The problem is that the North Koreans have massive artillery aimed at our ally, South Korea, aimed at Seoul, a city of 25 million, designed to deter anybody from acting. We're therefore going to have to go after those artillery pieces. The problem is they're defended by heavy air defenses. That means we're going to have to take down the air defenses. And that means that this is way more complicated than a surgical strike. And it's one of the reasons why the United States has tried to do everything possible not to have to go do this. Because if we do it, it is complicated, it is messy, and it's dangerous.
Well, it sounds incredibly dangerous. Michael Malice, do you see another way out?
I mean, we've already passed the point where we've tried everything. We've tried to be nice with them. We had the sunshine policy with South Korea. We tried to be threatening with sanctions, and Kim Jong-il chose to allow his population to starve rather than let the UN bring in food and keep them alive, because he said if we let the UN in, they won't need the government. So we've tried threats. We've tried to be nice, and North Korea continues blithely on its path. And, you know, I disagree in the sense that they now have an ICBM that is capable of reaching the United States. They have crossed the red line. And at the same time, I don't think it's realistic that we're going to engage in military action with them, certainly not in the near future, and certainly not when China and Russia both said very recently that military action is off the table.
George Friedman, it seems so reckless of China, which my understanding is the one country that might be able to exert pressure sufficient to stop this, to stand back and allow it to happen. Do you think the Chinese leadership has thought this through?
Yeah, I think they have. I don't think the moment for military action is there. I don't think they have a capable ICBM at this point. I disagree with my colleague. I think they are close to it, but their guidance system isn't there. It isn't proven. The Chinese feel that we will act before they reach that point. We probably are getting very close to that point, and they're prepared to let us go do that. The Chinese are not necessarily reckless, but they think the Americans are predictable, and we are in this particular case, and they're going to carry the burden. And I think the problem is that the United States really doesn't want to attack. But I think the division point here is, when do they have a deliverable nuclear weapon? My view is they don't have that yet.
I don't see a good outcome, or certainly good options. Thank you to you both, Michael and George. Appreciate it. Well, Democrats are eager to unseat the current president, of course, so eager that this week they're promoting a kind of medical coup d'etat against him. Could it happen? The 25th Amendment is what they're citing. We'll tell you what that is and what it may mean up ahead. Plus, another cop lies dead, her killer apparently driven by the hatred of police. There are a lot of people agitating against the police recently. Are they fostering a climate of hatred that caused this? We'll debate that just up. Well, Democratic plans for getting rid of President Trump before the next election are getting increasingly zany and maybe a little far-fetched. You'll remember that rigging the Electoral College was on the agenda. That didn't work. Impeachment was supposed to fix it. That's not going anywhere. And much to their chagrin, Trump is a teetotaler, so he's probably not going to drink himself to death. So here's the new idea, the 25th Amendment. If you watch any kind of lefty media, you've heard a lot about it recently. A group of Democratic congressmen want to recreate an 11-member medical commission that would remove a president from office if they deem him mentally unfit. Obviously, they believe Trump would immediately be ousted.
The 25th Amendment is utilized when a president is perceived to be incompetent or unable to do his or her job. He needs to resign. And I stand by that because he is inappropriate for the office.
When we send our troops into harm's way, they need to know that the president is of sound mind, rational, and doing it for the right purposes. And these tweets make us question that.
If any of the viewers want to Google narcissistic personality disorder, I'm very concerned about his fitness to be the president as well, and maybe a commission is the way to get at it.
I wait for an election. Jonathan Turley is a Shapiro Professor of Public Interest Law at George Washington School of Law, and he joins us now. Professor, thanks for coming on. So the 25th Amendment, I think most people are not even aware that it exists. Explain its purpose and whether it's ever been used before.
Well, it has been used. It has various parts to it. One is a temporary transfer of authority. We've had presidents who've gone through colonoscopies, for example, and they've handed over those powers to the vice president pending their outcome of their operation. What hasn't been used is Section 4. Which is really sort of the nuclear option. It's when a vice president goes to the cabinet and says, I think this president is not capable of discharging the powers of his office. It is also a provision for Congress to do that. That's what this bill is all about. But this is, in my view, wildly premature. And I can't imagine it can get much support even in these rather zany times.
So would it require the vice president's complicity? Would he have to go to the cabinet or the Congress with his concerns for this to work?
Pence would have a key role in whatever avenue they took. First of all, he would have to be a key player in taking the first approach, which is to go to the cabinet and get a majority vote of the cabinet. But he also has the abilities to derail the second approach. That's obviously unlikely. The biggest problem is that the 25th Amendment really foresaw physical disabilities. That's what most people were thinking of. They were specifically thinking of Eisenhower. Eisenhower had a heart attack and then a stroke that affected his speech. Then, of course, we lost John Kennedy in an assassination, and that sealed the deal. The 25th Amendment was fashioned at that time, and it was ratified. It does extend to mental disabilities, but a lot of people don't realize that a lot of our presidents had mental disabilities. Lincoln was thought to suffer from depression. Kennedy, Nixon, Pierce, Coolidge, they all had conditions that people had raised. But it's a dangerous thing once you get into the mental disability area, because that's when you can really get a lot of political mischief. You know, when the member of Congress said, just Google narcissism, if you do that, it would apply to probably 2/3 of the members of Congress. I don't think that's true. I think it would apply to every single one. I don't know any of the 435 who would fall outside that description. So, but it's not, I guess the point is, everywhere you go in lefty news world, you're hearing about the 25th Amendment. But it's not as simple as a couple left-wing congressmen getting together and deciding, I don't like the president, we're removing him, we're impaneling an 11-doctor panel or whatever. I mean, this is a process that's very unlikely to happen because it'd be hard to pull off. Am I right? No, it'd be very hard to pull off. In fact, in that second option, you need a 2/3 vote of both houses. But even if it were possible, what people have to keep in mind is that this is a dangerous game to play. It wasn't long ago when I was critical of the Democrats for frittering away their legislative authority under the Obama administration. A lot of members are short sellers. They tend to do things with not much foresight. This would be a very dangerous game indeed. If you succeeded in actually removing a president because you think that he's narcissistic, or as one member said, he's not doing the right thing for the right reason, that's an awfully dangerous standard. The framers didn't want that. That's why the 25th Amendment was passed as late as it was. The framers created a very simple and short and, frankly, inadequate process. And the 25th Amendment was meant to deal with that. But the reason the framers didn't go further is I think they were very uncomfortable with the thought of letting the legislature remove a sitting president.
Right, because we have these elections, or we used to have these elections that kind of decided the outcome. I thought that was the whole point. Jonathan Turley, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tucker.
It was interesting. Well, an NYPD officer and mother of 3 was assassinated, and it seems to be the latest bloody episode caused by widespread hatred of the police. Up next, we'll ask if some of the rhetoric, the anti-police rhetoric you've been hearing a lot for the last year, has had any effect on these attacks on cops. Stay tuned. Well, a New York City police officer was assassinated today in a cowardly attack, sitting in her car, shot out of nowhere, never saw it coming. Mysotis Famia was shot by a man called Alexander Bonds. He was a 2-time convict. He'd voiced a lot of anti-police sentiment. Bonds subsequently was killed by police. But it's just the latest in a series of horrifying murders driven apparently by hatred of police. Jim Garrity of National Review tweeted a compelling question today. He said this, quote, "If you think the wrestling tweet is likely to inspire anti-media violence, do you think anti-police rhetoric inspired today's NYPD shooting?" Which seems like a fair question. Dan Bongino was a former NYPD officer and also a former Secret Service agent. He joins us tonight. So Dan, I always want to lay blame on the person who pulled the trigger because I believe in free will. But I also think as long as we're talking about fomenting hate and creating an atmosphere where violence is possible, there are a lot of people fomenting violence against the police.
Yeah. Well, Tucker, I agree with you. I don't do guilt by association either. But here's the critical distinction. No credible person's going to blame Bernie Sanders for the Alexandria shooting, right? Even though he was a Sanders supporter, that guy clearly had psychopathological issues. But that's not what we're talking about with this anti-police rhetoric. Tucker, these are active calls for violence against police officers. It's not heated political rhetoric. It's not socialism versus capitalism. It's not the benefits of the Laffer curve. This was a chant on YouTube. You can still see it. What do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them? Now. This wasn't 1 or 2 people. It was loud enough that a person on the 5th floor of a building got it on tape. That's totally different than guilt by association. And I believe that they do share blame because they got what they wanted. They got a dead cop, horrifically so.
What's so remarkable is outside of this channel, I'm not sure anybody said anything about it. I mean, Hillary Clinton, who, by the way, was a presidential candidate 7 months ago, endorsed the group who held the rally where that was chanted, whose members chanted that. I didn't hear any outcry about that. Did you?
You know, Tucker, this is the tough part about this, having a lot of brothers and sisters who are still in law enforcement, the federal side, and a friend of mine I spoke to today who's with the NYPD. This is an NYPD veteran who had 3 kids. These kids are never going to run in that mother's room in the morning again and jump on the bed. Every Christmas, they're going to remember their mother's not there. Every Easter, every holiday, every 4th of July, they're going to have memories of their mother. They're not going to have memories of their mother anyway. They're over. As of yesterday, they are over. And yeah, where was the outcry when it mattered against these cowards in the Democrat Party, not all of them, but these activist far-left liberal clowns who gave these people a platform at both the DNC and Tucker? They were invited to the White House. Now, I'm not going to do what they do to us. I'm not even blaming all of Black Lives Matter. But this was a significant portion of engaging in heated, violent rhetoric.
That's right.
And they were given a platform. They would be considered domestic terrorists if they were Republicans. And everybody knows that's true. This is a disgrace that these people weren't called out sooner. And they did it for votes because they knew it was their activist base.
That's exactly right. And when asked, do all lives matter, Hillary Clinton said, in fact, no, just Black Lives Matter. What's so striking and so clear about this is there's no complexity or black and white in this murder. This was a cop who was sitting in her car and a guy, she wasn't involved in an altercation with the guy, it wasn't an undercover drug bust gone wrong. Right. She's just sitting there and a guy comes out of nowhere and murders her. There's no way to read this other than she was killed because she was a cop.
Yeah, let me give you some inside info I got from one of my sources today. He told me that some of it may have been reported, but that the guy who did this was actively casing it beforehand, Tucker, meaning there was an element of premeditation to this. This wasn't some random emotional outburst. He had planned this. He had walked by that THV, that temporary headquarters vehicle, a couple of times before shooting this officer, assassinating her, shooting her right in the head. And, you know, if I can just give a hat tip and a salute to the partner there. I don't know if you noticed, but the radio call by the partner says 1085, 1085, my partner's shot as he's screaming for help, right? Tucker, 1085 is the officer code for officer needs assistance, non-emergency. What does that tell you? That's how heroic that guy was. You call it 1085 when you need help, but you don't want people rushing to the scene, getting hurt, getting there. His first instinct, even though they were under fire, this cop, the hero cop who survived, was to worry about his fellow cops getting there safely and not getting hurt and not his own life. You still want to tell me about pigs in a blanket and what do we want dead cops, you clowns, in the Black Lives Matter movement? You don't have a tenth of the guts that guy did, calling it 1085. The real code is 1013 in an emergency. And he was thinking about his partners first, not himself, even though he was under fire.
That's an amazing detail. Dan, thanks a lot for that.
Yes, sir. Anytime.
Up next, Bernie Sanders' wife reportedly now under investigation by the FBI, but the evidence she allegedly broke the law has been around for years, according to our next guest. We'll get to the bottom of that, or try. Plus, the ACLU says a new Texas law banning sanctuary cities is proof this is becoming a totalitarian police state in America. We'll have one of the lawyers making that argument just ahead. Well, since we live in a world, excuse me, where pro wrestling references are now the very same thing as violent threats, one wonders what to make of remarks that California Congresswoman and progressive hero Maxine Waters recently made about HUD Secretary Ben Carson. During a speech on Saturday in New Orleans, Waters said that when Carson appears before her congressional committee, quote, "I'm going to take his ass apart." Excuse me. Quote, "Carson knows nothing about the mission of HUD," Waters continued. "He doesn't care about people in public housing. He believes that if you are poor, it is your fault. And he doesn't know the difference between an immigrant and a slave," whatever that means. Now, we've mocked Maxine Waters before in this show, but we should take her seriously on this subject. Congresswoman Waters is a confirmed expert on the question of housing, especially her own housing. Consider where she lives, in a 6,000 square foot, $4.3 million mansion in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Now, how'd she afford a place like that after having spent the last 40 years working in government? We'd hate to speculate. How does she keep getting reelected despite not living in her own congressional district? No clue there either. The district Waters actually represents in Congress has the second highest percentage of African-American residents in the state of California. Now, the neighborhood where Waters actually lives is just 6% black, or as she might put it herself, if she didn't live there, it's segregated, like 1950s level segregated. And as we mentioned, it's really, really rich. So how did Maxine Waters pull off a housing coup like that? Who knows, but it almost qualifies her to be HUD secretary herself. Well, the Sanders clan is lawyered up. Federal agents reportedly are investigating whether Jane Sanders, the wife of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, committed fraud by lying on a loan application for Burlington College, which she ran from 2004 to 2011 and went under not long after that. Senator Sanders says this is all a witch hunt orchestrated by one man, attorney Brady Tenzing, who's managed Trump's presidential campaign in the state of Vermont. Is that true? Is it a witch hunt? We decided to ask the man himself. Brady Tenzing joins us tonight from Burlington, Vermont. Brady, thanks a lot for coming on.
Tucker, thanks for having me.
So let's get to the basis of the claim. So there was a story a couple of days ago touted by the Sanders campaign or office that the person who supplied the notion, who told you originally that Jane Sanders committed fraud on a loan application, in fact was passing on hearsay, and therefore, says Senator Sanders, this whole claim is false. How do you respond to that?
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because there's been quite a bit of confusion over that issue. Now, there's two aspects to this claim. The first one came about as a result of a letter that I sent to the United States Attorney that presented facts that were called from Public Records Act requests, and those facts were analyzed. And then after that, there was quite a bit of reporting done by excellent reporters at 7 Days and Vermont Digger. Those are firmly based on facts and figures and analysis. There was a later bit of evidence that came to me after the school closed, where a state legislator told me that a bank executive told him that the Sanders office interfered with the loan, and as a result of that interference, the bank wrote the loan conditions so stringently that the college failed.
Huh. Okay, so that is not even related to what I understood the court claim to be, that Jane Sanders borrowed more than the college could hope to ever repay, and in fact was not able to repay it and went under as a result, and that constitutes fraud. Is that true, do you believe?
Well, all right, so Jane Sanders bought a huge piece of property from the Catholic diocese. In order to buy that property, she had to borrow $10 million, $6.5 from the bank, about $3.5 from the Catholic diocese. Now, in order to get those loans, she had to confirm guaranteed donations of $2.6 million. Of that 2.6, the school was only able to collect about 25%.
So does that constitute fraud, do you believe?
Well, it certainly is something that needs to be looked at. And of the confirmed donations, 3 of the donors have come forward to say that the school overstated their pledge amounts.
Ooh. So here's what I don't understand. I don't think anyone contests that Jane Sanders' tenure as the head of Burlington College was a disaster in the end for the school, which, as we said, no longer exists. She walked away with quite a bit of money. How did that happen?
When Jane Sanders was asked to leave by the board, she lawyered up back then and was able to extract a $200,000 golden parachute before she left.
How can you tank a college and then walk away richer?
That's a great question, Tucker. And if you look at who was harmed by this whole financial debacle, you can see the Catholic Church lost almost $2 million. The taxpayers of Vermont lost almost $150,000. The bank lost untold amounts of money, and the school went bankrupt. And so the students were harmed, and vendors were harmed as well. But the Sanders, they were not financially harmed.
I don't think there's any contesting that. FBI investigation or not, I think what you said is factually supportable and shocking. And I'm glad that you're here to recount it for us. Brady, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
The state of Texas is trying to ban sanctuary cities within its borders. The ACLU doesn't just oppose that. They say the ban could pave the way for a police state in Texas. An ACLU lawyer will be here to explain their reasoning next. Well, Texas lawmakers passed a new law abolishing sanctuary cities in their state. As far as prohibitions go, it's pretty mild. The bill does not compel police to enforce immigration law. Instead, it just threatens city leaders with fines if they categorically refuse to cooperate with ICE or ban their police from asking about immigration status, but individual cops can use their own conscience under the law. The ACLU, though, is furious, and it is suing to block the law from taking effect. Lee Gellert is a lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union, and he joins us tonight. Lee, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
This seems, as I just said, a pretty mild anti-immigration statute that allows individual cops to opt out if they so choose. So how is this a step along the road to a police state?
Yeah, well, I think, I said probably immigration police state, not a police state, but I actually thought that you would be with us on this case. And the reason is, let me just explain how the law works. It requires local police, local sheriffs to enforce immigration law. And even more than that, a police chief can go to jail if he makes a mistake. And so it's going to lead to profiling, it's going to lead to mistakes, it's going to lead to cities being sued. But let me just talk about what I think you probably are most concerned about.
I think you're factually inaccurate, though. I don't think that it requires, at least I have it right here, it doesn't seem to require police chiefs to enforce immigration law. It just says that they can't categorically opt out, and they can't blanketly prohibit their officers from asking about immigration status. But it doesn't say they have to affirmatively go enforce the law.
Right. Well, I think we read the law as saying that line officers do, and I think that's one of the things the judge will decide soon. We had a hearing, and Texas is saying no, we think it does because it requires entities to enforce the law, and entities includes employees, which includes everyone. But even if you're right about that, let's talk about a small city with 5 deputies. 2 go out and enforce immigration law, 3 don't. And so depending on what street you are in that town, someone's asking about immigration status or not. And let me just talk about, I think, what you are most concerned with, which is public safety. Can I just make that point, or did you?
Yeah, no, but let me just say, I mean, you're going to say that it's going to make the cities less safe because people won't report crimes. And I've done this segment a million times. This law actually has a carve-out for that and a protection for whistleblowers or people who report crimes that they can't be prosecuted once they do that. But what bothers me is you don't like immigration law. You want open borders, or you think we should have less stringent qualifications for citizenship. That's all fine. We have a legislative process to affect that. You can change the law. What bothers me is encouraging people to ignore existing law rather than changing the law itself. Why don't you spend your time doing that?
Right. Well, so first of all, the ACLU has never called for open borders, but let's put that aside for a second. It's not me who's saying it's going to make cities and counties less safe. It's the police chief. So I have an op-ed here from all the major police chiefs in Texas, right? And those are not people who vote ACLU down the line. It's San Antonio, it's Houston, it's Dallas. It's not the ACLU who has sued. It's all of those cities have sued, and they're all saying it's going to make them less safe. So, I mean, right, you can disagree with them.
If cops said, wait, no, because police departments say, look, we need to racially profile in order to keep our cities safe. And the ACLU is the first in there with a lawsuit. Look, don't tell me that you're just doing this because you're on the side of cops. That's just silly. They have their own agenda, but cops don't get to make the laws. They enforce the laws. They're not lawmakers. They're civil servants.
What they're saying is they're the experts on the ground, and they are the ones who are saying it's going to make our cities less safe. They are saying it's just politicians going for sound bites. The major police chiefs are all against this law from a public safety standpoint. I'm not saying we're suing only because of them, but we happen to be representing sheriffs and mayors in this suit. But they are the ones coming. I mean,
they don't have a say in this. No, they don't have a say in this. They don't get to make the laws. And by the way, if you're concerned about a police state, then the last arrangement you'd want is cops deciding what the rules of the state are. They carry out the law as passed by the people's representatives.
But you know very well.
Remember, I thought you guys were against dictatorships.
Oh, but you know very well that they are going to carry out the laws, but they are using the courts and saying, we think this law is unlawful. We're going to be sued because of this. We're not provided with training. We're not provided with costs. So they're asking a court to decide. If the court decides against them, of course they'll carry out the laws.
Okay, but here's the look. They are charged with carrying out the laws, not with making them. And if they don't feel morally capable of doing that, they can go join the fire department. That's the way our system works. Same with the military. Same with all civil service. So the question is, why would you attack a municipality for enforcing a federal law? If a murderer was loose in Austin, Texas, would you be against the local police capturing him because he violated federal law in another state? I mean, I don't understand.
But I mean, right? You're not being responsive. No one is saying that, and they do with serious criminals turn them over to immigration, but they don't want to be out there asking every car for their immigration status. They don't want to be doing that type of thing. They don't want to be investigating when they don't have to, especially because they're not getting the costs and the training. And so that's not what we're talking about.
So is that the new legal? Is that the new legal standard that cops just kind of get to do what they feel like doing, and anything they don't want to do is unconstitutional? Is that your position? I don't understand.
You know that's not our position. Exactly. These cities have gone to court to challenge the law. If they lose, they will enforce the law. But what they are telling you, and they are the experts, that it is going to make the cities less safe. They are the ones saying it. Dallas, Houston, El Paso, San Antonio. They have all come forward to say this is not a good idea for Texas from a public safety standpoint.
Okay. Well, we can have that debate, but they don't get to decide. Voters get to decide, and they have. That's my view. Lee, thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
One outraged transgender activist has a harsh message for straight men. We've got that next. It could be the future. Stay tuned. Well, things are moving so fast in America's cultural revolution, the one underway now, you may have lost track of some of the new gender rules. Maybe you don't want to know what they are. Some of them don't seem to make much sense, much less comport with the high school biology you once learned. Remember that? Tough luck. You've got to learn them anyway. People are getting fired or getting drummed out of polite society for saying the wrong thing, even accidentally. So pay attention. A few years ago, the goal for transgender rights was acceptance. It sounds pretty reasonable. Most people thought so. Then it was legal enforcement of transgendered identity, with punishment for anyone who doesn't use the right pronouns or eagerly share bathrooms. That happened. Now we're advancing toward mandatory transgender dating. For real. A transgender activist called Zinnia Jones recently lit into straight men because so few of them seem to want to date other biological men who are transgendered. Jones tweeted this: "I don't see a problem with telling straight guys who are exclusionary of trans women partners that they should try to work through that." Jones added this: "These angry declarations that they have some absolute right not to be with trans women are just misplaced and inappropriate. Some absolute right to date who you want. You thought you had such a right. Silly you. Your personal romantic preferences are no longer your own. They're now an extension of your political preferences, and they are therefore public property. So if you're a biological man who prefers biological women, you are a bigot. Now laugh if you want, but like virtually everything that seems too absurd or too ugly or totalitarian to be real, it'll almost inevitably become a mainstream cause for the left at some point. And then what? Why wouldn't dating websites, for example, compel men to date one biological male for every 5 biological females? Why wouldn't Facebook and Twitter ban users for the hate think of preferring the opposite sex? Good question. If nobody stands up to complain, they probably will. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Don't forget to DVR it if you haven't already. And stay tuned for the 5 from New York City. That's next. Have a great night.